Evelyn Quinn. She's going to come speak to you. And just to let you know, since we have started, 2 more 11 minutes have gone by, so we've lost 2 more people in the United States. Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Kelly Clark and Project Noel, for allowing me to tell my story. My name is Evelyn Quinn. I'm also known as the eldest of the LeBron girls, Pat Quinn's wife, Zach and Katie's mom, and on May 4th, 2017, I'm also known as an angel mom. I became a member of a club I never, ever wanted to join. I never thought I would lose a child to an overdose. We are not one of those families. I was born into a traditional Catholic Puerto Rican family. My sisters and I grew up in a loving home. Our house was filled with wonderful smells of my mother's cooking. My father worked hard to give his daughters every opportunity to succeed. My parents were married almost 60 years before my father passed away. My husband was the only boy born to an Irish Catholic family. He had 5 sisters, all with advanced college degrees. My husband, Patrick, worked his way through law school as a corrections officer at the Cuyahoga County Jail. His parents were married over 30 years before his mom passed away from cancer. Both of my husband and I grew up in stable and loving homes. Even though we came from different ethnic backgrounds, we shared a love for family. Last May, we celebrated 35 years of marriage. Growing our family wasn't easy for us. I suffered numerous miscarriages and had a stillborn. We always wanted to have children, and we agreed there were other ways to have a family. When my daughter Katie came to us, we were thrilled. And a year later, Zach joined our family. Born in my heart, I would tell them. They were my miracles. Raising my children, they were play dates, sleepovers, dance, and soccer. They spent summers at Briarcrest Pool and Friday summer nights playing jailbreak with neighborhood friends. My husband coached soccer in Little League, and I hosted team feeds. Drugs would not enter my family, not my kids. We were good parents. My kids were in marching band, for goodness sakes. I was naive. The first time my son took an opiate, it was a bottle with his name on it after hand surgery. Zachary was a handsome boy. Most parents will say that about their children, but my son was gorgeous. He was charming and very polite. He was popular, a natural athlete, very smart, but most of all kind. He was the boy that saw a classmate sitting by himself at lunch and would sit with him. He included the shy, awkward kid to play at recess. When he saw someone being bullied, he would defend them. Over the years, I had countless phone calls from mothers thanking my son for thwarting off bullies. You raised a great kid, Mrs. Quinn. You should be very proud of him. Drugs never entered my mind. In high school, he began to smoke marijuana. My husband and I talked to him, but like most naive parents, we thought it was just a phase. Looking back, I wish I was more proactive. Later, I learned that if someone was prone to addiction, the prescription pain medicine changed his brain chemistry. So a couple years later, the marijuana lit up the receptors in his brain. So before I realized, he was smoking pot daily. We talked about his marijuana use, and he denied it. When my father died suddenly, Zach took his death very hard. My son wanted to join the military, and I reluctantly agreed. He later received a letter disqualifying him from the Marines. That was when things became worse and turned to stronger drugs. At first, it was pills. Percocet was his drug of choice, the pill that was prescribed to him after hand surgery. And later, as it happens often, he graduated to heroin. My smart, beautiful boy became angry and defiant. His junior year, he was on the honor roll at Ehovie, where he was studying computers. His senior year, we weren't sure if he was even going to graduate. His group of friends changed, and he began to stay out late and skip school. When people say, the day your child dies, you begin to grieve, I tell them I was grieving for my son long before he passed. I grieve for that smiling, mischievous young boy with a kind heart and always a quick hug. And I love you, Mom. I grieve that I slowly watched my boy turn into someone I didn't recognize, nor did I like. I became angry, and we were at each other's throats. I told no one about his drug use, not even my sisters. I was ashamed, and I was afraid of being judged. I was angry at my son and furious at his so-called friends. After graduation, I told him since he didn't want to go to college, he had 1 month to get a job. You said you were 18, and you can do what you want, and you're an adult, so you need to start acting like one. If you don't have a job in that time, in that month, you have to live somewhere else. And I gave him the number of a homeless shelter. He did find a job. My son was a hard worker, and he never had trouble finding employment or keeping employment. The next 5 years were a roller coaster. They say addiction is a family disease. It not only impacts the substance user, but everyone that loves them. Experts say you become as sick, if not sicker, than your loved one, and that's very true. I put off getting help myself because it was my son that had an addiction, not me. I ignored my health because I was too busy trying to fix my son. If I was okay, if my son was okay, I was okay. I had a classic case of codependency. As my son's addiction progressed, so did my obsession with fixing my child. After my son's first overdose, I went into a tailspin. We sent him to outpatient treatment. That was all that was available here at the time. I was glad he was going, but looking back, he should have gone to detox and inpatient. Suddenly, I became super mom, and my job was to save my son. I hovered and checked up on him. I would go through his phone and block numbers from drug users. I checked his bank account for withdrawals. I followed him around and snooped through his things. I can tell you, a worried mother does a better investigation than the FBI. I kept his secrets, covered up, and defended him with family. I was in denial. I felt if anyone knew about my son's drug use, I would be judged. I was afraid of being judged for fixing, helping, pushing him, or not pushing him enough. Worst of all, I feared if I would be judged, that my love for my son was somehow flawed and I was a bad mother. After an OBI, we sent my son to rehab in Florida. I thought he was going to get the help he needed. Sadly, the facility was an unethical facility. They overcharged my insurance and refused to give updates. The facility mentioned they had family therapy, but none was offered. I later learned about body brokers and marketeers. Facilities like the one in Florida and many others take advantage of desperate parents willing to do absolutely anything to help their child. How could my son, that was raised in a loving and stable home with parents that are occasional social drinkers, develop an addiction? I wanted to understand why my son chose to do drugs. I wanted to know what I did wrong. What could I have done better? Then I saw a post about a presentation at the Sandusky Artisans. The topic was addiction and mental health. Then I read the comments. It's a choice. Let him die. But then someone wrote, the first time it may be a choice, and then it's not. I didn't understand. It's not a choice? I attended the presentation at the Sandusky Artisans to educate myself about addiction. We thought my son was safe in Florida, and my husband and I attended the Cleveland Cavaliers championship parade. At the celebration, I received a call from my son in Florida that he had left rehab. My son had no money, no credit card, and we refused to bring him home. You need help, we told him. Then my son called his sister, who was living in Australia at the time. He woke her up from a deep sleep. She told him, get the hell back in rehab. Nonetheless, our outing was ruined. We were worried sick and left before the parade even started. He did return, but not before my anxiety went into overdrive. When I got home, I called the Artisans and asked if my son wanted to leave was normal. Joey Sapina explained it was common and invited me to a support meeting the following Monday. I walked into a room of strangers, and they later became family. I entered the room wanting to know how to fix my son, and later learned the person I needed to fix was me. I needed to control, and since I couldn't control my child, I drove into educating myself about addiction. I learned addiction doesn't discriminate. And addiction is a compulsive, relapsing brain disease. I learned about stages of detox, Suboxone versus Vivitrol. After a frantic phone call from my son, we brought him home, and he was in worse shape than when we sent him down. I was upset. You entrust your child to professionals, and they treat him with Xanax and Subutex, a deadly combination. I felt tremendous guilt. Again, I began to control my son. I demanded he attend meetings and arranged for a peer supporter. I did what I could do to keep my sanity, and I attended additional support meetings. I soon learned slogans like, I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it, and let go and let God. Well, that's easier said than done, especially now with fentanyl being in the area. Knowing that the next time my son used could be his last. That's what makes us crazy. We are terrified of losing our children. I attended support meetings to fix my child, and I learned the only person I could fix was myself. I shared my thoughts and fears in church rooms, and they understood. There was no judgment. They were there once too, and I was not alone. And I began to have hope. They do recover, I heard them say. I slowly learned that I could love my son, but hate his addiction. I shared once in my despair, dropping to my knees, sobbing, please, please, stop using. And my son looked at me and quietly said, Mom, you have no idea how hard it is. I then realized he wanted to stop. He did a few times, and I began to see glimpses of my beautiful boy, and I had hope. But his recovery never lasted very long before he relapsed. Zachary, as I mentioned before, was a reliable, hardworking employee. He was hired at FedEx as a dock worker. While employed, he rarely missed a day, and he was very proud of being their top producer. He received numerous raises, all while he was under the influence of drugs. He was what we call a high-functioning addict. He had frequent drug testing, and after 3 drug tests, my husband told me to make arrangements for him to go to rehab while Zach was at work. I called a reputable facility, and thankfully, they had a bed. The intake worker told me he had to call himself. I said, yeah. I want to get this ball rolling. Do you need my insurance information? Then I went upstairs, packed his bag, and placed his suitcase in the car. At first, he didn't want to go to jail, and we told him, rehab or jail, that's your choice. I then told him he was too pretty to go to jail. Then he agreed. The rehab he attended had a family program, and we attended every weekend. Part of the morning was education, later group therapy with other parents, and after lunch, another group session with your loved ones. The sessions were emotional but productive. The topics during the parent sessions were setting strong boundaries and self-care. They strongly encourage parents to attend support groups. The counselor told us the best chance of your child succeeding is to get help yourself. I thought, I got this. I go to 4 meetings a week, just trying to keep my sanity. I hadn't had a solid night's sleep in years. I would wake up a few times during the night to check on him. I rarely went out, missed social functions, delayed vacations, and avoided friends. I was envious of my friends bragging about their children's accomplishments. I hid behind my grocery cart and avoided eye contact. My son did well in rehab and lived in a sober living facility. He was doing great, attending meetings and counseling sessions. He didn't take the Vivitrol shot because the pills made him drowsy, so he said. I was disappointed, but I said nothing. Then I received a call that Zachary had a work-related injury and was in the ER. He had a straddle injury while trying to secure a pallet in the truck. He slipped on the rollers and fell onto a metal pipe. I crushed my nards, he said. He was in pain, but the hospital didn't give him an ice pack or Motrin. They offered him Tylenol with codeine. He told the staff he was in recovery. His record should have shown that he was treated twice before in that ER for overdose. The nurse said, "It was okay. You're under medical supervision." Sadly, that pill jeopardized his housing, his job, and his probation. Codeine is an opiate, and his brain was healing, and it lit the fuse and set off the receptors. My beautiful boy was gone several weeks later. The day he died, I spoke with him a couple of times. He was living with a friend and was going to start a new full-time job the following Monday. He had made arrangements with his FedEx boss. If his new job didn't work out, they would hire him back. "You're a great employee," they said. Less than 3 hours later, I received a call that his friend found him unresponsive. I called my husband and rushed to the hospital, where they escorted me into a little room. The nurse asked if there was anyone to call. I said my husband is on his way and told them to call my priest. The doctor came in and it was a blur. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." I remember my husband taking my hand and my priest took the other hand and walking down the hallway. Then I saw my handsome boy's body lying lifeless on a gurney with a tube down his throat. I began wailing and climbed onto the gurney and cradled my son like a baby. I began to say a prayer that I would say when I wasn't sure where he was. "God, place your loving arms of protection and surround my son with a battalion of guardian angels. Remove those negative influences on my son's life. Surround my son with people that lift him up and not drag him down. I lost my son forever." I believe I survived my son's passing because of the love and support from my family and friends and the love and support from my groups in the recovery community. The next few days, my home was filled with people bringing food, cleaning my house, and taking care of my husband, daughter, and I. Family flew in from all over the country for the funeral. I felt blessed and grateful that I attended all of those support groups because I learned it wasn't my fault. I did everything I possibly could and not to dwell on the what-ifs. I recall having a conversation with my son about fentanyl. I recall him saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I only buy from people I know or ones that my friends know." My son died of fentanyl poisoning from a dealer recommended from a friend. It's been over 3 years, and I still cry every day. You never stop grieving your child. It's unnatural for a parent to bury their child. He was supposed to bury me. When you lose a child to overdose, our grief is complicated. While we love our children unconditionally, their drug use caused a lot of pain, disappointment, and at times anger. During my son's visitation, I saw a woman waiting to speak to me. I went up to her and asked her how she knew my son. She said she never met my son, but she had lost her daughter the previous year, and she had to stop by and pay her respects. We embraced and cried together, two strangers, but we knew each other's pain. I never saw her again, and I don't recall her name, but it's a moment I'll never forget. Grief comes in waves, and sometimes it's a tsunami. The first few months I was in shock. I either slept too much or not at all. I was forgetful, emotional, and distant. Sometimes getting dressed was all I could do that day, but I had my support group and my artisan family that would check on me, drive me to church, and stop by for a quick visit. They understood my grief because they were also grieving their child that was still alive. For months I spoke of my son in the present tense, and I had difficulty processing his death. I felt he was in rehab and he would still be coming home. Then I'd get a tightness in my chest and I knew it wasn't true. I know some people don't want to bring Zach up because they don't want to upset me, but it upsets me more that they don't speak of him. A friend of mine took the time to print out sheets asking to write down their favorite memory of my son. When I have a day that I'm really missing him, I read their stories. From pulling a classmate out of the pool and saving her from drowning during summer gym after being hit in the head with a medicine ball. He saved my life, she wrote, and many more stories. The death of our children is traumatic, and many of us suffer from from some sort of PTSD. Hearing a siren would have me shaken for hours. Months after my son passed, I attended grief counseling at the Cornerstone of Hope in Cleveland. They had a group for accidental overdose. I learned that my feelings were normal. Our stories were very similar. I learned that healing takes time and to be kind to yourself. Give your anger to God, but above all, forgive yourself. So I gave God my anger for those that kept pulling my son into drugs, his friends that referred him to the dealer, and the dealer that sold the drugs that took his life, the doctor that gave him the opiate even though he was in recovery, and the shady body brokers that took advantage of my son's vulnerability. But I struggle with the person that was with him when he overdosed. That person left him behind to die. That person one day has to ask God for mercy because what that person did was unforgivable. I believe God was with my child when he died. I choose to believe that he did not die in vain. In his short 23 years, he touched many lives and he was loved by many. I invited the young men who did drugs with him to the funeral. That was my first step in healing. Even though I did not like their influence they had on my son, they were also grieving. Many of them are still here, still struggling, in prison or in early recovery. I was told by a grief counselor, your journey begins with those who share your pain. I remember how much the woman who came into my son's viewing, I realized my purpose. I began reaching out to mothers that lost a child to overdose. I would message them on Facebook. I'm so very sorry for the loss of your beautiful son or daughter. We now belong to a club we never ever wanted to join. I lost my son too, and you are not alone. I knew how much it meant to me and met many angel moms, including Candlelit Clark and many others. This year, because of COVID-19 and the increase of fentanyl in our community, we have seen a surge in overdoses. As of last Thursday, there has been 16 confirmed overdose deaths in Erie County, and 18 more suspected overdoses waiting confirmation from the Lucas County coroner. Tragically, our community is on pace to more than double the overdose deaths from the previous year of 17. There are too many moms receiving that dreaded call, too many families grieving, too many children losing a parent. It's all up to us to be the change. I ask that you reach out and support each other. Say your child's name, tell their story, reach out to parents whose child is in active addiction, share your experience, give them strength. Pray for those that are in active addiction and for those in recovery to reach out to them and let them know that choosing recovery is beautiful. Pray for those that are not reaching out for help because of the stigma, shame, and fear of being judged. There is no shame in reaching out for help. For those that lost loved ones, find your purpose. Let the world know addiction was just a part of your child's life. Your child, son, brother, sister, father, mother, were not bad people. They just had a disease of addiction. Pray for those that could not submit their loved ones' names today, the ones that feel ashamed of how their loved one died. Our children's life mattered. They weren't perfect, they were troubled, and their deaths didn't have to happen. Thank you for listening and coming out tonight, and God bless.